початку одне організаційне оголошення.
One organizational announcement. The briefing by Mrs. Lysenko planned for 1:30 is being moved to 3 p.m. as Mr. Sergei Bochkovsky, who's head of the Emergency State Service of Ukraine, will join her briefing. And now Colonel Andriy Lysenko, spokesperson for anti-terrorist operation, with the latest from the east of Ukraine. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. The situation in the zone of anti-terrorist operation has a trend to become sharper. The number and intensity of shellings by terrorists of the positions of the forces of anti-terrorist operation has grown significantly, including shellings from residential areas of towns and villages. The Ukrainian military are repelling the attacks of the gunmen, inflicting heavy losses on them. The Russian Federation continues to move to the east of Ukraine a significant number of military machinery and personnel. The Russian military are designating their armored vehicles with signs characteristic of the Ukrainian army. This testifies to the fact that Russia continues to hide its participation in the armed conflict in Donbass and unfolds a campaign on the discreditation of armed forces of Ukraine. The bandit formation LNR has announced the creation of their own air force, including 2 aircraft, an assault airplane Su-25 and a training L-29. This fact testifies to the launch of an information campaign on the cover of the possible use of Russian military aircraft against the anti-terrorist operation forces. Especially tense is the situation in the vicinity of Donetsk airport. Also, there's a relocation of machinery and arms in the direction of Mariupol. Apart from artillery and mortars, the terrorists are massively using the Grad multiple rocket launchers and neglecting the lives of local population. In the city of Uglegirsk, Donetsk region, 2 kids have died, boys of 7 and 16 years of age, and a 9-year-old girl is in the hospital after the shelling from Grad. Also, the shellings by terrorists led to losses among peaceful residents in Marinka, Krasnohorivka, and Zerzhinsk. Today, at around 7:45 a.m., the gunmen have again shelled from artillery the city of Debaltseve. At least 10 people were wounded, including an 8-year-old girl and her mom. And because of the massive mortar fire from the terrorists, the crossing by individuals in transportation and vehicles on the direction Novozovsk, Krasnoarmeysk, Talakivka, Mariupol was suspended from 6 p.m. to 7:05 p.m. Over the last 24 hours, 3 Ukrainian military were killed, 66 were wounded. Yesterday, on the crossing point Kurakhove at 4:20 p.m., the Border Patrol has detained a citizen of Ukraine. While searching the boot of his car, they found a military fatigue with a sign of Russian Federation and an honorary certificate issued by the bandit formation DNR. Yesterday, volunteers, together with the Ukrainian military, have handed over humanitarian aid to the residents of the village of Trokhizbenka, Popasna district, Luhansk region. They have given medicines to the local ambulance, and the residents of the village got food. The terrorists are continuously shelling Trokizmenko from Grad multiple rocket launchers. The volunteers of Mykolaiv region from the project First Peoples have restored and handed over to Ukrainian military one lorry Kras. In the nearest future, they plan to repair another 5 military lorries, vehicles for the armed forces of Ukraine. Little Ukrainians also are supporting continuously the military forces of Ukraine. In particular, the students of school number 1 from Bereslav Kherson region have made little angels and patriotic drawings and pass them on to military who are protecting Ukraine in the zone of anti-terrorist operation. The rotation is continuing. Yesterday, 35 law enforcers of the special company of court police Griffon have returned in Chernivtsi region, have returned from the anti-terrorist operation zone to Bukovina. They were manning road checkpoints and patrolled one of the cities of Luhansk region during the night. Yesterday, from Mariupol, a detachment of policemen from Ivano-Frankivsk came home. The Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine has issued a statement about the state of fulfillment of Minsk agreements. The Minsk agreements have provided for the clear-cut schedule of the implementation of the Minsk Memorandum, including the bilateral ceasefire and withdrawal of heavy arms and return to the delineation borderline. The Russian side, however, have recalled their signature from this document. Today, Ukraine, as usually, again has addressed the Russian Federation with a proposal to sign the schedule of the implementation of Minsk agreements according to the version of the 13th of November and to provide for the ceasefire from the 19th of January. The President of Russian Federation continues to corroborate his commitment to the Minsk agreement.
Could you give us more details about the situation in Donetsk airport? Are there any losses during the last 24 hours and also wounded? There are wounded. As to those who are killed, that is the data for the whole zone of ATO. I cannot tell you exactly where, but I can tell you that 99 times the Ukrainian troops were shelled at during the last 24 hours. 47 settlements were shelled at. You were talking about the losses among peaceful population in Gorlivka. You did not mention Gorlivka. Were there any losses in Gorlivka? One second. As to Gorlivka, we don't have any detailed information. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you now. Yesterday, the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation stated that according to the Minsk agreement, the territory of Donetsk airport is to be freed by Ukrainian military. Is it another speculation of Russians? According to Minsk agreement, according to the protocol of the 5th of September, memorandum of the 15th of September, they don't say anything about Donetsk airport. The first item was ceasing fire by both sides. Ukrainian military are executing it, but there are provocative shellings and our servicemen are forced to shell back, to fire back. Wall Street Journal, to continue the question, were there any coordinates in these Minsk agreements? This separation line, does it go along the airport? Where is the separation line? The separation line was the one when these agreements were signed. The Donetsk airport was under the control of Ukrainian military, and the condition, and there was no requirement that they have to leave this airport. We understand why Russian side insists on us surrendering the airport. That's not just strategic object. That is one of the platforms from which the terrorists can start their assault. But I believe item 3 was after the heavy weaponry is withdrawn 15 kilometers away. That means that they have to take their heavy weaponry 15 kilometers away from Donetsk airport, and that is outside of the center of Donetsk, and they do not want to leave the center of the city without their weapons, and that is why they insist on us surrendering the airport, and we do not surrender. Yesterday in DNR headquarters, they informed that the major of intelligence of the armed forces of Ukraine was imprisoned yesterday, and they said that they keep him in the camp for military prisoners of war in Donetsk. What do you know about this camp? As to the getting our servicemen imprisoned, we have no information about that. As to the place where Ukrainian citizens are maintained, there's no one camp. There are several places where our civilians and military are kept, and they demand the ransom for them and some other things. As to the statements of the DNR about victories, they as far as I remember, yesterday they informed about 4 downed military aircrafts, Ukrainian, and about many other of their victories, but it was all yesterday what they were stating about that. Their statements do not correspond to the reality, and please pay attention to that. But if you have any doubts, please ask for clarification. Then in Donetsk airport, does Ukrainian army try to get the positions that were lost during the regime of the silence, or does that mean that Ukrainian army starts offense? The Ukrainian army has the object where they had to be, the Donetsk airport, which is just before the line of separation. That is where Ukrainians are to be. The militants are not observing the Donetsk agreements in relation to Donetsk airport. We understand why they are doing it. What was happening in the last days, that was just returning the status quo. Our military are again fully controlling this object. Now they can take personnel and ammunition there. That is not a simple task because the shellings continue from the side of the militants. We managed to clean some routes to bring everything needed for our people, for our defendants in the airport. 2 more questions. Reuters agency. Once you mentioned about aviation, was aviation working yesterday? And what's the situation in Piske? Yesterday, Ukrainian military aviation was not working. They were ready to evacuate heavily wounded people. We informed about that yesterday morning, and we're doing it because the heavily wounded servicemen are to be quickly delivered to the hospitals. The military aviation was not used. The situation in Piski, it's still very tense. for several days already. There's warfare going on there. We cannot say that it's under our control because the situation changes all the time, but most part of this settlement is under the control of our Ukrainians. The next question will be in English.
Финляндии. Я хотела уточнить по поводу
I just wanted to ask about the line of demarcation. As far as I remember, in Minsk agreement, there's nothing about such line. Where is that line mentioned? Thank you so much for this question. That's a great question. In Minsk agreement, I believe in the protocol there was a sentence that as of the moment of signing the protocol, the forces which are occupying certain positions, which are holding certain positions, they stay at these positions, and that is the line of demarcation. There were no coordinates mentioned in the memorandum of protocol to control this line, and that is the line here. There was the international working group set up, contact group, that included the representatives of OSCE, representatives of Russian Federation, and representatives of Armed Forces of Ukraine. And they have these coordinates, and they are responsible for having this demarcation line. Every morning, at least, they report on that. To clarify, as to Russian aviation, if Russia uses the aviation, what will be the reaction of Ukrainian military? What measures will be taken not to allow the shellings of the troops from the air in case the Ukrainian national airspace is violated in order to attack our peaceful population? The targets will be eliminated. Any questions to Colonel? No more questions. Thank you. I would like to remind you again that the press briefing about the humanitarian assistance